Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Newburyport Literary Festival. My name is Jennifer Entwistle, and I am the co-director of the festival. And we are in our 17th year of bringing authors and readers together. This is our third year as a virtual festival. So let's get started. I want to introduce our campus culture panel. I love a good campus novel, and I know a lot of people do. So this is going to be a great discussion. We've got Mona Awad. She's the author of Bunny, which was named Best Book of 2019 by Time, Vogue, and the New York Public Library. It was a finalist from the New England Book Award and a Goodreads Choice Award. And it's currently in development for film with Jenny Connor and New Regency Productions. She teaches fiction in the MFA program at Syracuse University, and she has a new book coming out, All's Well. We also have Elaine Hsieh Chou. She's a Taiwanese American writer from California, a 2017 Rona Jaffe Foundation graduate fellow at NYU. Her short fiction appears in Black Warrior Review, Guernica, Tin House Online, and Plowshares. Disorientation is her first novel. Julia May Jonas is a playwright and teaches theater at Skidmore College. She holds an MFA in playwriting from Columbia University and lives in Brooklyn with her family. Vladimir is her debut novel. Our moderator today is Lauren Grodstein. She's the author of a short story collection, The Best of Animals, and 4 novels, including the Washington Post Book of the Year, The Explanation for Everything. Lauren's new novel, We Must Not Think of Ourselves, will be published in the spring of 2023. Lauren teaches in the Creative Writing MFA program at Rutgers-Camden, where she is a professor of English, and she lives with her family in New Jersey. So welcome, everyone. And Lauren, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. It is really such a treat to talk to the three of you. I loved reading your novels. I was captivated in a life that is filled with carpooling and laundry and small children, and of course, teaching and big dogs who might make an appearance in the background at any moment. All 3 of your novels were really transporting. So I'm so excited to talk to each one of you. I'd love to start with just a general conversation about your own experiences in academia. I have specific questions for each of you, but since academia does run not just through your novels, but through this whole panel, I'd love to know a little bit about, your time in academia and what about it sparked your novels. And I will just pick a first responder. Julia, how about you?
Sure. So I describe my life in academia as kind of in but not of. So I have been essentially what is a visiting artist at Skidmore College. That's my official title. And so I have taught playwriting there, and I have also directed shows, and I've taught theater studies classes, but I haven't done the tenure track route. However, I have been witness to that for many different people, and have certainly sat in on many faculty meetings that make up so much exciting drama of university life. So that is essentially, I've been a kind of a adjacent, slightly inside, but also slightly outside observer of that whole world.
It's interesting that you are not of it, because Vladimir itself is so very much of it, that you get so much right about, well, of course, you've been around it for so long, but so much right, not just about the pressure of getting that tenure job, but of staying relevant to that tenure job. It's really wonderful. Mona, what about you? What's your experience in academia been like?
So yeah, I started out I was a graduate student in English, but I was very, very jealous of the MFA students because I was at the library all day, every day, working on my thesis. And the MFA students, I would watch them, like they would wake up at noon and watch YouTube videos all day, and then, start writing at like midnight. And I was so jealous. So yeah, I really wanted to do an MFA because I was interested in writing fiction, and I always had been. So I did do an MFA. And while that was a total dream come true, I also thought, this would make a great horror novel, if I were to capture just the spirit of this. And so Bunny was born from that. And then I ended up becoming a teacher. And now that I'm on the other side of the desk, I just realized how powerless one can actually feel as a teacher, and how vulnerable that position really is. And I was interested in that. So that's where All's Well kind of came from. Yeah.
And I look forward to talking more about the vulnerability in that novel. And speaking of spending so much time in libraries, Elaine, a lot of library time is clocked in Disorientation. I'd love to know a little bit more about your experience in academia.
Yeah, I was a PhD student for 2.5 years and then joyfully dropped out. Best decision ever. But it was in France and I was doing English lit. I know it makes no sense, but I don't have experience with like American PhD programs. So I actually had to research how grueling it is and how so many students are on antidepressants, because in France it was very, it was not very rigorous. We were just sort of left to our own devices. But yeah, one of the reasons I dropped out, there were a few reasons, but one of them was this horrific seminar I gave on intersectionality, where all the professors got really angry at me and started yelling at me and like turning red.
In English or in French?
Thankfully, it was in English. I think most of it was in English. It would have been more frightening in French. I did not have a great experience that day. Academia. The PhD world is just very strange, and I would have these really surreal moments where there would be like a protest outside, but we were in this conference room talking about Virginia Woolf's, like someone's dissertation was on Virginia Woolf's use of semicolons, and you would have this disconnect between like the real world is outside, but we're just talking about semicolons. I find that part of academia really funny. And then I also did, after I quit the PhD, I re-entered academia by doing an MFA. So didn't, I guess, get away from it completely.
No, it's kind of like Hotel California, right? Like you can check out, but you're really not going to leave. So Mona, you mentioned vulnerability before, and it's interesting. All three of these novels, and I suppose a lot of fiction really does have vulnerability at its heart. And all three of these novels, although they're very different, Elaine is a little bit more comedic, but there's darkness, I think, in each one of them. So Mona, yours becomes in many ways, I think, the most surprising in the turns that it takes. And I'm curious, like, I hope it's not a spoiler to say that we sort of dive into the occult, starting in a very traditional, it's the theater department. It's not around a seminar table, but, there's a student play going on. This is like a world I recognize. There's the narrator who's in chronic back pain. That's a world I recognize, and then suddenly we're talking about spells and a mysterious trio of people of old men in a bar, and the world really shifts on its axis. And I'm wondering how you decided to bring the occult into a book that seemed, at least on the outside, to be very much about college life.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think there is a lot of the occult in the arts on campus. I kind of encountered that in my MFA. There's a lot of witchiness in the way that we talk about creativity.
Oh, that's
even prompts, involving tarot cards, and so I don't know. I think it's interesting, but I think sometimes it's a way too for women, for female professors to wield a kind of power that they might not be able to wield otherwise, to kind of tap into that witchiness. Yeah. But in terms of All's Well, I think it comes from just working with Macbeth, because that's the other source text. There's All's Well That Ends Well, but then there's also Macbeth. My character is a theater director, and she is really hell bent on directing All's Well That Ends Well, but the students want Macbeth, and indeed that's the play she doesn't want to face, and it's the one that she has to live off stage. Yeah. So that's where the three men come in. They're sort of they represent the witches and Macbeth, and And then I always thought that there was a kind of witchiness to Helen in All's Well That Ends Well, who's the main character. That she has this kind of she takes agency in the play and heals this king, and the way that she heals the king, this ailing king, is kind of mysterious. And I really like that aspect of it. And for me, that's where All's Well That Ends Well and Macbeth sort of intersect. Yeah. So the witchiness was just in the Shakespeare texts, I felt, and that's why it's in my book. And I really enjoyed working with it. It was fun.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell there's just, I love the it's pretty, not, I wouldn't call it irreverent, but there's a sense of playfulness with the way that you use Shakespeare that's unusual and that I just really, really loved. And it got me to brush off. I hadn't read All's Well That Ends Well in a really long time, and I'm not going to lie and say I read it again, but I did at least go like Wikipedia the plot again. And I was like, oh, right, that's right. And then, Julia, the darkness in your novel seems to stem from, at least in my interpretation, a real sense of doubt in our protagonist about how she is supposed to exist in the world as a middle-aged professor. You know, everything, the sort of ground on which she's built her life, her professional life, her marital life seems to suddenly be shifting really rapidly. And a lot of those shifts are embodied in the character of Vladimir, who you did a great job of making an imaginary man really sexy. And I was wondering about how you accessed that kind of darkness, the darkness of self-doubt, the darkness of not knowing how you're going to live the rest of your life. You know, she's older than you are, so you really had to project yourself or project this woman's life far longer than your life has been. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, you in a way almost answered it in your question. I think what I was so interested in is a character who has felt herself to be on the right side of history and the right side of thinking, and on the side of her students, and then is finding the world shifting underneath her, where all of a sudden she's finding that she no longer thinks the same things, and that her values seem to be different, and the literature, the thing that she always felt like was her her rock, she's not even able to teach that in the same way. That's being drawn into question. And I feel like that is, I think, something that many people, I think that's just aging. I think I recently said it's just aging. And it's been an experience that I felt as being an artist, even at my age. And I've also watched other professors, as you said, I teach at Skidmore. It's a very small theater department. And, the professors who are the age of my narrator, they built that department. That department didn't exist before them. They created this place of study. And I've also seen them just make incredible gaffes, but also be trying to hold on to a way that they understood and they interpreted the world, and then find that that's shifting on them. And not being able to understand, in a way, what their identity is anymore. And I think that is just always what I'm drawn to in characters who feel like, I think it's hard. We have a false sense that we know ourselves in general, but then when our kind of context clues start to erode, then I think we really are at sea, and we're really in a point of transition. And that's I'm just always very compelled by those kinds of stories.
It's unsettling. And then what's also unsettling, right, is that gap between, who you were and who you are. I feel like a lot of antagonism is directed towards students, right? Like, it's the students who've changed, not me, or they're different now, I'm not. And you also see that reflected in all of these novels, right? Like this sort of new unease with students and sort of discomfort with the power of students in a whole new way.
There's something about power, I think, that's on either side of the desk, as one was saying, that each person is interacting with in a different way, and each has a different conception about the power that the other person has. Right. It's a huge amount of confusion, and so part of the book is just like our inability to see other people and see where their actual viewpoint is coming from. And
then, Elaine, you take that darkness and sort of spin it And so it becomes, in some places, your novel is a Black comedy, and in some places it's really just a comedy. Like, it's really funny. And I'm curious about like, is it hard to be funny on the page? Was that just naturally? I mean, academia is in its own way ridiculous. So you were able to really capture some of that. And I'm curious if you consider yourself a comic writer, if you wanted to write a satire, or if that's just sort of, you thought about this material and that was the best way to express it.
Oh, thanks, Lauren. I thought you were going to ask, like, how do you know if you're funny?
I don't know. I don't know how anyone knows if they're funny or not. I guess,
it's always
how many retweets you get, I guess.
Yeah, it's a relief when anyone says that they found parts of it funny, or because I'm always like, oh, I think this situation is funny? But some people, my friends, have screenshotted sections and been like, oh, I laughed so hard at this part. And I was like, I didn't even write that to be funny.
Yeah, sure.
And
There's
then like a part
too.
that I'll think is really funny, no one has screenshotted. So I'm like, humor, I don't even know. But I did not intend to write a satire, and I think I was over planning. So when I was meticulously outlining and being afraid to sit down and write, it was going to be much more serious and somber. I didn't think of it as comic at all, but then the first version of the novel, this really snarky, omniscient narrator emerged. So it's a different version than the narrator now, but I was just like, I don't know where this voice has come from, but it just sort of sprung out. And I think in retrospect, I was like, oh, I'm just really angry. I just had all this anger about a lot of things happening in the world and in my life. And I think that snarky narrator was this way to protect myself and feel like I had control and power over these despicable men like Michael Bartholomew, who's the chair of the East Asian Studies Department. And yeah, I think that's how satire, it was protection for myself. It was a way to hold at distance, I think, topics that would have been too close to home to write about, or I probably wouldn't have wanted to face the page, but this way I could be like, okay, when I write, I'm going to just try to make myself laugh. And that made writing much more enjoyable, because it's always hard, right? But it made it a little easier.
Yeah. If I can ask, what were some of the things that made you angry when you were writing this book? I mean, there's a lot that seems clear on the page, but I'm just curious if you don't mind answering, like,
oh no, I always love talking about what pisses me off.
Yeah, bring it. Yeah.
Do you guys remember in 2015 Michael Derrick Hudson, a white poet?
Yes.
Poetry
published. Word, right?
So he couldn't get one poem published, and as we all know, rejection is a fact of writing. Like, you're just going to face rejection. I faced so much rejection, and I have definitely shelved poems that I'm just like, or not poems, sorry, stories or whatever, that I'm like, listen, I've submitted this a bunch of times. Like, I'm getting sick of submitting it. Or, I think most writers, our inclination is to set it aside, send it to friends, sign up for a workshop. But this man was like, the problem is not my poem. The problem is I'm white. I can't get over it. And he was just like,
see, this is what I mean. You're laughing. Like I love that you're laughing.
It's so horrible, but yeah, you laugh through the pain, right? Yeah, it's also so absurd, because I just find that entitlement, like, I could have never thought of, my brain wouldn't go there. My brain wouldn't be like, I'm getting rejected, so I'm going to change my identity. But it's hilarious and very disturbing that his mind was like, well, it's because I'm a white man, so I'm going to be Yi-Fen Chow, which he stole from a classmate. That's actually a real person.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he grew up with her. Like, they went to like the same elementary school and middle school or something. Yeah, a Chinese American woman. So he stole that name. And then it was my last name, like, spelled exactly. And so a lot of Asian Americans were mad, but I felt like especially mad because I sadly hated my name as a kid, and my friends would make fun of it and make like noises with it. And there was fast food place next to my school called Mr. Chow's Chinese Fast Food. And they would be
gosh,
like, oh, Elaine, is that your dad? Is your dad in there?
Right.
Like shit like that. So anyways, because Michael had not grown up with any of this, I was seething. I was like, how dare you take my name, but also try to take this identity you have no right to get, because then he submitted his terrible poem to a diversity issue, an anthology. So specifically, he chose an anthology that was closed off to him, like he wouldn't have been able to. So that was a huge driving force behind my angry typing.
It's such a wild story. And the idea, right, especially in light of everything we know about the past few years in terms of, Asian American life in this country, to think that Asian Americans somehow have a leg up as opposed to having to sort of fight for their civil rights every day. It's like galling. But the fact that you're laughing about it, I think, says a lot about your book and the way that you're able to transmute this really painful stuff into stuff that made at least this reader really laugh. So I think that's terrific.
Oh, thanks, Lauren.
Yeah. So I'm curious what you guys think about like the way that, and forgive me, this is a little bit like, none of your novels are about creative writing programs, right? They're about either there's theater, there's East Asian studies, and there's literature, which is separate from creative writing. And I'm curious, what you think about creative writing as part of academia. Do you think that creative writing, like, I loved what you said before about it being sort of like witchy. I mean, a lot of what creative writers do is just make stuff up. And yet, and that's a kind of witchy move, right? To like get other people to believe the stuff that we make up. So I'm curious what you guys think about creative writing. Is it foundational? It's, it's so popular, and yet it seems fundamentally to me anti-academic. And I'm wondering if you guys have ever thought about that. I was thinking about it when I was reading your book. So I'm curious if you guys have ever thought about creative writing's place in academia.
I mean, I teach playwriting to undergraduates, which is a form of creative writing. And I have several thoughts about it. I mean, I think I never took a creative writing class as an undergraduate in college because I was far too afraid of what anyone would say about my writing. And so I already have a kind of esteem for my students that walk in the door to do it. Yeah. I also feel like, especially undergrad programs are not really the place for any critique to actually happen. I really think they should be about expression and learning how to see and learning how to hear and learning what your own voice is and making experiments and thinking about form in certain kinds of ways. And I think, I love when I have, for example, an environmental studies major or, some other kind of major who is coming in, because I think, stories exist in every single facet of our lives. We're always being confronted with dramaturgy or story structure in some way, whether we're realizing it or not, whether we're looking at a feed of something or we're actually engaging with a book. We're always being confronted with stories. So I think the act of learning creative writing or learning dramaturgy through doing it can be very useful, I think, for people as they continue on their journeys, in whatever they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It also creates a safe space, right? For people, like, if you're going to you can't really make stuff up in your environmental studies major. I mean, right. You can, but you're going to fail. Whereas in creative writing, there is this freedom to just have a little bit of fun. I used to save, when I was in undergrad, my creative writing was always dessert. You know what I mean? Like I'd eat my vegetables and like get my science credits in, and then, yeah. Well, thank you for answering that philosophical question. I'll turn to your novels now. All three of your novels have surprises at the end, in different ways. So I'd love to ask each one of you, Mona, I'll start with you. Tell me a little bit about where the ending came from. How did you come up with that? And then I'd love to ask each one of you that without spoiler, and if you can figure out a way to do that without spoiling.
Well, I had kind of a challenging task with this one because because I was dealing with two plays. I was dealing with the onstage production of All's Well That Ends Well, and then the narrative that's attached to that, right? And then, of course, the fact that my character, who is the director of that play, is inside of another play off stage. So the novel had to, move through the onstage plot line, but also move through her own offstage narrative. And I was just wondering, I mean, which one is going to win? All's Well or Macbeth? Where do I leave this person? Is it going to be a tragedy or a comedy, ultimately in the end? And it was I actually wrote 3 endings. So
how did you decide which one to use?
Just like the movie Clue, there were 3 endings. I in the end, I kind of felt, I thought about the title. Again, not too much of a spoiler because we do go pretty dark, but I thought about the title and I thought about the initial impulse, which was to deal with this person who has this wish, which is a completely understandable wish. I'm in deep pain and I just long to be freed from that pain and have agency in my life. And, what am I willing to sacrifice for that? And so just sort of following that story all the way through, if I really thought about it, it led me to, I think, choose the right ending. In the end, the right ending just presented itself sort of in the end intuitively, even though I had to kind of write 3 different ones to get there, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. The ending, I never would have guessed you'd written anything else because the ending feels so organic to everything that comes before it in your novel.
Great. That's great.
Do you have readers? Did you show it to people or did you really just go with your own instinct?
No, I did have readers, but I knew when I sent the first draft with the first ending, I knew that it wasn't quite right. I just felt like, no, that's not where my character should go. I haven't discovered that yet, and I need to sit with the story longer to figure that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Julia, what about you? Where did your ending come from?
Well,
again, without spoilers.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I had an image that was in my mind, which is in the beginning.
Actually, right. We could talk about your ending because your ending is in the first page.
The beginning of the ending is in the first page where she has the title character bound in this chair. So I had that image of her in the cabin, and that was actually from I had written this as a play first. And the play hadn't really worked, but I kind of retained, there were many other things going on in the play. It was 2 characters and 2 actors, and they played something like 30 characters or something like that. So actually, in a way, very novelistic. It makes sense that it then transferred. But I had that image, and so I thought, okay, I'm going to write to that image. And then as I was writing it, I realized I was writing, in a way, a Gothic novel. And so then I thought, okay, well, all right. I started rereading some Gothic novels and thinking about endings and in terms of that, and thinking about where this kind of obsession would lead to in this very classic story structure. And I thought about the narrator in particular as being someone who is wanting to force a story. She wants something to, she wants to become a character in literature in a way. And so that's how the ending came about. Really was from thinking about that image and then thinking about what the form was and how they were going to meet each other.
Yeah. And Elaine, what about you? Where did your ending come from?
I think, I love a climactic ending. I feel like I'm pretty traditional in I like chaos and
you delivered.
Oh, good. I think so. Ingrid, my protagonist, is very repressed, and she's really just she's been stepped on her whole life, and I knew she needed to begin this story there, with so little agency over her own life, and I knew at the end of the novel she needed to somehow become the exact opposite, just finally take agency and let this rage she's been keeping in burst out. So I knew it needed to be something like that. And I'm trying to think of how not to spoil it, but it's like the novel takes place basically in an academic year. So it made sense to try and tie that in with, what she would be doing at the end of the academic year. And yeah, I guess I just try to follow what I thought would on one level be logical, like, oh, this would happen at the end of the year, but then also just let pure joy and chaos and what I would love to do to this man, Michael, and just write that and let Ingrid have, just let her go a little nuts in that final scene. And it was so cathartic to write. Yeah. So I think with that ending, it was one of those endings where I didn't really change it. I think once I landed on that ending in this version, it was like, okay, this is it. But I did then eventually write an epilogue, because the original version just ended right after that big scene. And I was told, like, it's a little, like, we need something to bring us back down, because it's too much. So yeah.
It's always nice to know everyone's okay after.
Yeah, exactly. You want to know the fallout, it's like the end of the movie when the credits roll, but they have like the little scene of what happens. So that's what the epilogue was.
Yeah. I have a couple of questions from the audience. The first, I'm going to ask the second one first, which was, did any of you feel anxious about returning to your respective campuses or academic lives after publishing campus novels? Julia, I'll throw that at you.
I felt as though, what I like to say is that students barely read contemporary literature. So I didn't feel as though if there was going to be follow-up from the students, it would come. And I felt also in a very sweet and supportive way, they were so happy for me. They were so happy that I had published a book. They were excited. And then it was, there was press and there were things they could look at, and that felt exciting for them. And it feels like, I think, I felt this in college, that you want your professors to be doing real things if they're going to be teaching you. So I also hope that if they read my book, and I think for students who have, that there's enough nuance and enough grounding in the character that they didn't feel like they were being attacked. And certainly there's nothing at all personal about what happened inside of that book.
Right. And they know you well enough to know that you're not tying up any of your colleagues in a cabin. Not yet. Mona, what about you?
I don't know. I think there's something in the nature just of putting a book out in the world. It just always makes me feel super thin-skinned and kind of vulnerable and scared. And so I definitely felt that way. I mean, I did, even though of course, both my campus novels are fiction. I was still worried about, I don't know, just being out in the world after that. But it was totally fine. Everybody was very supportive, and it was just like Julia said, when I think about myself as a student, I was always excited for my professors when they had great publishing news and they were doing exciting things. That was the reason, right, why I wanted to work with them. I already thought that they were great. So yeah, I think in the end it all works itself out. It's just moving through, at least in my case, just the emotions that come up when you're putting yourself out there as an artist, right?
Yep. And Elaine, did you return to academia, or you pieced out your PhD program and were like?
Yeah, I have not returned. I'm not teaching. Well, I'm teaching like online. I'm going to start doing, like those online workshops, but sort of being tied to a actual university. That has not happened. And I do wonder, something I thought about was, will anyone want to hire me because I disparage? Well, I don't, there's nothing about creative writing in the in the novel, but
I have sat on so many search committees we cared that you publish. It's that you publish, not what you publish, for better or for worse. So do not worry about the content. Also, you write a great book. That's what
That's
matters.
great. That's great to know. Because, yeah, I feel like people have asked me, oh, it seems like you really don't like academia because you left. Would you ever teach creative writing? And I'm like, sort of to your question earlier, I'm like, oh, yeah, because that's not academia. I mean, I think it depends on the program. And there's, there are like PhD programs, and like USC has one. My friend did an MFA. We were both in an MFA at the same time, but ours are really different because hers was tied to the English department too. And so she was taking like real classes, like writing papers, and her defense was like a 2-hour oral defense. And yeah, it was very different from mine. Did not have any of that.
Yeah.
And I tend to think I feel like creative writing is like the dream position in academia, because other academics have this pressure to be publishing in like JSTOR and Muse or whatever, so they're churning out actual really intense, hard research, and they have to put out several books to be considered for tenure, and they have to go to conferences, and you know what I mean? There's like constant research. And then with creative writing, I feel like you just get to be like, well, I published a book or two, and all the knowledge I need is in here. I don't need it's but it totally depends on the professor. Like, I think some professors, their workshops and their classes are like about their personality.
Yeah.
And then you have other professors who are very craft focused, and they study craft, and they're bringing you like very specific passages to analyze. And so it's a real mixed bag, because I think a lot of MFA programs, I wonder what you guys think about this, if this is also in your experience, but they just sort of let the professor like have at it, just like do what you want. That's been my experience, why it can be so different just depending on the professor you get.
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting thing, right? Because the only criteria you really need to get one of these jobs is to have done it yourself, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're good at teaching it.
Yeah,
so
I'll
take
you
Elaine's
said it,
question.
Lauren. Say it again, for louder for the back, because I mean, I feel like, I don't want to get in trouble or anything. I'm also speaking about just like my friends' experience with MFAs all across the country. I just want to say that I'm not like specifically just talking about mine, but definitely a common thing that we've talked about is it is a skill to be a teacher. It's a skill to be able to facilitate, and workshop is so volatile, because you literally can have people telling you, and this would happen to me to my face, like, this experience is not believable to me because it didn't happen to me. And I don't believe, for example, that a white person would do this. Like that was just out of the realm of their belief. But it would be like, oh, but this, it actually did happen. But, so it's very volatile. It's a very precious and frightening space. And if a professor doesn't know actually how to facilitate and has never been taught classroom management, it becomes then dominated by the students. It's like Lord of the Flies. You know what I mean? Like, if there is zero facilitation, oh, you bet, like the people who are used to taking up the most space and will take up the most space. And workshop can become incredibly toxic, where, people I know people who would leave in tears.
Sure.
Who would have to get like drunk or high to come to workshop.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a space that's really ripe. I mean, on top of everything you're saying, it's a space that's sort of ripe for being written about itself. Mona, you did that in your first novel, right? Or you sort of wrote a satire about the.
Yes, funny. That's all about that kind of a horror novel of workshop, sort of literalizing the creative process, and all of the horror of it, and the wonder too, and the beauty also. But absolutely, it's a very disorienting, space to be in, and you are vulnerable, and it's so true that there's so many social dynamics at play. that determine the way in which work gets talked about. And it's also true that there are teachers who just sometimes they enable that, and I don't think it's intentional at all. But I think it's just like Elaine was saying, it's just a question of, I don't know, what kind of a listener are you? What kind of a facilitator are you? And how much experience do you have? And what is your aesthetic? And all of those things come into play. So yeah, absolutely, it can be a really volatile, scary space, even though it's just a room where people are talking about, their short stories.
I know.
Yeah.
But it's also like, here is my baby. What do you think of my baby?
Exactly.
You don't like my baby? Wait, you think my baby is ugly? Oh, you think it's the worst baby you've ever, but it's my baby. Right. I could go on as well about there's another I'm sorry, did I cut someone off? No, I was just going to keep riffing about my baby. No, there was another question actually, which is maybe less painful or maybe not, which is from Charlotte. She wanted to know if each of you could talk about your path to publication. And I guess we'll take it to publication of this novel. So Julia, we have two, I think, debut novelists, but Julia, if you'd start.
Sure. Well, most of my work has been in the theater. And so I wrote Vladimir during the pandemic, and I had always written prose, but I had been called away to do a play or work on something. So I had gone, I had abandoned it, but also I hadn't clicked into a voice. So I started writing Vladimir, and I thought, okay, I've clicked into a voice. I can keep going. I know what this is. Yeah. In that kind of way that feels like a gift. And so then I had a very dreamy and straightforward process of publication in which I wrote the book. I cold emailed agents.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. They got back to me, or a few got back to me, and I had meetings, and then I was pregnant with my second child. And so I said, I need to sell this book by March. Do you think we can do that? And it was, I guess it was January, and the agent that I went with said, yeah, I think we can do that. And so then we sent it out, and then we placed it with a publishing house, and so it was very straightforward. I don't think I'll have it as straightforward of an experience ever again. But this was a particularly easy one, and I only feel like I only feel comfortable with it because my theatrical career has been nothing like that. No straight lines.
Listen, if you thought it was easy, at least you had a newborn. You know what I mean? To make things a little more complicated.
Yes, I did edit with my newborn sleeping beside me.
Yeah, but it's a wonderful thing and sometimes I think that we hear so many horror stories that it is nice to be reminded that sometimes you write a really good book and people appreciate it and it gets sold, and that's a really nice thing too.
Yes.
That can happen too.
Yeah.
Mona, what was the path like to Oswald?
Well, Oswald is my third book. So do you want me to tell that story, or do you want me to tell the story of my first book?
What do you think, Charlotte? I wish that this is when I wish we weren't on Zoom, so I could ask Charlotte herself what she wants to know. My guess is a lot of people want to know about how you got the first book out. So maybe.
I think so, right? Yeah. I was working on that book for 6 years. It took a really long time, and I actually went and did the MFA in order to finish it. And that was my goal. And I remember after the first year of doing my MFA, I thought, okay, I'll try sending it to agents. So I did, just a couple. And the feedback I got was, you need to work on this more. And they actually did give me some constructive feedback. So I internalized that, and then spent my second year just working on the collection, and linking it up. And it sort of ended up turning into a novel of linked stories. And then when I graduated, I sent the book out again to agents and got good responses, and went with one, and we went out that September, I remember, and then we sold it that fall. Yeah. So it was really exciting, but it was a long path, and I remember being really scared and even wanting to drop out of my MFA because I was an older student. I was 35 at the time. and just feeling really, really insecure about it, and so certain that I wouldn't be able to find like a place for it, but it did work out. Yeah.
Elaine, what about you? What was your path to this book? Getting it out in the world.
I started writing it in 2016, and I think the road was rocky in terms of I wrote 3 separate versions, so with different plot lines, different characters, different settings, and each time I just thought I had failed. So the first time it was like 120,000 words, and I put it away for a few months. And when I went back to it, I was like, oh, I hate every single part of this. I clearly have failed at being a writer. I gave that a shot, and I just really thought it was over. But then I heard about Nanowrimo a few months ago. Do you guys know about, the national, like November? And for some reason, I feel like it's very celebrated with genre, but I feel like literary fiction tends to turn their nose up at NaNoWriMo. I don't know. But to me, I was like, this sounds amazing. Like, I want to join in this movement. And I didn't finish a whole second draft in NaNoWriMo. Oh, yeah. So it's the National, I forget what it stands for, but it's
National Novel Writing Month, and
yes,
it's November.
In November, and there's like a website you can sign up and you can enter your daily writing goal, and so it's very much community based. But the goal is to write a 0 draft in 1 month. And so I gave myself this goal. I stopped calling it a first draft because I feel like 0 draft was a lot more freeing, and knowing that this isn't a real draft. This is me just getting words on the page. And so I wrote a version of it in the first person and cut out a bunch of story, because it was like a 4-person POV novel before this. And Ingrid is 50 and she's married and she has kids. So that all changed. But then with the second version, which I turned in to my thesis advisor at my MFA, Hari Kunzru was kindly but very wisely, was like, Elaine, this isn't working. And I was like, no, but I wrote a second version. And I was like, I can't believe I'm starting over again, a third time. But I was like, I can't give up. I've come this far, right? And I knew Ingrid, like she was the part in every version, her sort of story and her growth was the same. So I knew that was the kernel. I just had to keep holding on to that, and then finished the third version in maybe like nine months or something. So pretty fast, but I guess a lot of it, like what happens to her, I'd already knew how to write. But anyway, so the writing process was quite, really took it out of me. But then, like Julia and Mona, the publication process, I think I was fortunate in that I also cold queried people, and I queried people I had met through like NYU has this agent day. None of them wanted the book, which is fine, but it's I think it's just, I just want it like to be transparent, and anyone interested in like what this process is like I did get to meet agents, but unfortunately none of them wanted it. But then it did work out where I found my agents, and then we went on submission after doing like quite a bit of revision for several months, but then once we were on submission, it went pretty fast. And that was my process.
I mean, there's for every novel, there's a different story behind it. But I believe, someone said this to me when I was in graduate school, that good writing finds a home. And I think that that's true. I don't know, it doesn't always happen quickly, and it's not always clear what the home will be, but I do think that good writing. So for the writers out there who are listening, like I do think that sticking to it and having faith does almost always pay off in writing in ways that it doesn't necessarily in like ballet or geopolitics or something. Julia, there's a question for you about your cover, which is how much, if any, say did you have on the cover of Vladimir?
Oh, well,
It's a sexy cover for those of you who haven't
yes,
seen it.
it's a very sexy cover. If I have it, I don't have it in reach, otherwise I would show it. Yeah, I was shown one cover. I saw it that evening. I thought, wow. And then I kept thinking about it. And then I decided that I really quite loved it. I mean, the book is about a kind of flipping of gaze from a male gaze to a female gaze, and I think the cover is quite witty. So I was shown one, but I was all on board with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that people don't always understand that, we don't always have a choice in cover, that your title can be changed. Did you all as well as my guess was your working title? Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
So you always
and I have to say, just I loved carrying Julia's book around. Like, it was fun, to be reading it and have people see this man.
Like face forward in the subway. Like,
yes, it was very fun.
I think
was Vladimir always?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Was Vladimir always the title of Vladimir?
Yes.
And Elaine, what about Disorientation?
No, I went through a few bad ones that I'm literally too embarrassed to tell anyone. But Disorientation came from like a giant brainstorm sort of towards it right before going on submission, where I was like, and I just it was like 50 words. I was just trying to, do some automatic like free association, and landed on disorienting or disorientation. And then I polled my friends, and all my friends said disorientation. And then later on, people were like giving me not giving me ideas, but things I didn't even know about that they connected it to, like disorientation guides on campus. Do you guys know what those are? Because I had never heard of them. Okay, they're like a new phenomenon, I think, where undergrads write. It's almost like a zine, where they tell you the real orientation for their school. And I got to see, someone sent me some examples, and I was blown away, because they're talking about sexual assault. They're talking about really how to survive, financial aid and loans, and like the real stuff. And it's sort of like the true guide to college. And they were like, oh, were you playing on that? And I was like, no. But that's awesome. Proud of you, undergrads. Like, yeah, fuck up the system.
Yeah. So we have 5 more minutes. So I thought I would ask if any of you guys have favorite academic novels, or novels you'd recommend.
One of my students just asked a question. Sorry, I saw she's.
Oh yeah. Oh, is there another question on the Q&A?
Yeah.
Oh, there is. Okay, so we'll do. Oh, hi, Mona, says Christina's son.
Hi, Christine.
Did you all? Okay, so bookmark the academic novel question, and instead, all of you actually, did you all outline your novels beforehand and stick to it? And also, what is your writing process like? As in, how many do you have word counts every day? Do you write in the mornings? That sort of thing.
I didn't outline my novel. But I had written this kind of foundational play. So again, I had some touch points, but then there are certain parts where I think I have no idea where they came from. They just naturally evolved. And then as I was writing, the biggest thing that I felt like I needed to do was just to make sure I worked on it the majority of the week. And so that I didn't lose that sense of momentum. So I tried to work on it at least 5 days, if not 6 days, because I was feeling like I really wanted it to be done, and tried to get as close to 1,000 words. And if you do that, you write a lot of words very quickly.
Yeah. Other folks?
Right. So what was the outline? Oh yeah. So the very first version over outline. I know it depends for every writer, but since I had never written a novel before, I didn't know how to go about it. And I think that anxiety manifested in my like Virgo over planning way. But the reason I don't recommend it anymore is because I realized it was like executing homework for myself, because I would look at my outline and be like, oh, this happens in this scene, down to the, it was so precise that there was no joy in discovering what my characters could do or how they would surprise me, which I think a lot of writers, right? That's like the fun of it, is not knowing. So that really made the process unenjoyable for me. And I had to stop myself from outlining the other versions. I would let myself maybe write down like a sentence or two at the most for like what the next chapter would be. But, instead of like 3 paragraphs, I was like, no, I can't do that anymore. So I think it depends for every writer, but maybe don't be afraid of the blank page. The way I was very afraid of it, but I think the blank page is like, it's freeing. And your characters, it's really fun when your characters get away from you, and that you let them take on a life of their own. So yeah, now I'm sort of like anti-outline. And writing process, I don't have any process. Yeah, I'll write I write in bursts. I can't really stick to a schedule. So I tend to do like binge writing and then I will not write for like a long time. Yeah, I'm sort of all over it, but a lot of writing like in bed, which I don't know if that's good. I feel like you're supposed to be like in a chair and in like an office, but I would be like in my pajamas with my cat, here, eating Cheetos. And
that sounds like a dream. That's amazing. I want to live my life that way. And Mona, what about you?
I tend to write in the mornings. If I'm working on a project, I'm going to be really regimented about it and do quite a long stretch of hours. And I outline, but not too much, because I agree with Elaine. It saps the joy. So I like to leave a lot of room for invention. Yeah.
And we have 1 minute, which means if anyone does have an academic novel they love.
I love Penin. I think that's the one.
Penin is, yeah. Nabokov, Penin.
Ooh, I just thought of one. I'll shout out Don Lee's The Collective, which I feel like not enough people. Yeah, I wish I'd been introduced to it further, but it's a really beautiful and moving and smart campus novel about these 3 Asian American friends. I think it starts in like the 90s or so, and you see them grapple with their identities and a lot of Don Lee's brilliant. He's like father, I feel, one of the Asian American literature. So yeah, that's my recommendation.
Mona, you got one?
Yeah. Well, I'm very, very excited to read Elaine's book, and I've read Julia's and I loved it. So I'm going to say that one.
So Vladimir.
I have the cover here.
And there's the sexy cover. Thank you guys so much. What a wonderful discussion. It's such I can't say enough good things about all of your books. It was a really pleasure to meet you all.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
I want to thank you from the festival. This was a great discussion. Thank you to everyone, the panelists. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our audience for coming.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.